While the Carolina Hurricanes have figured out their top six winger and their defensive situations, there's still at least one spot the Hurricanes need to take a look at, and it's their second line center. Now, there is possible options if they go internally, and in that case, who are the three guys that might potentially see time at second line center in Raleigh?
You're Locked On Hurricanes, your daily podcast on the Carolina Hurricanes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the everydayer for making this your first listen of the day, 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, talking everything about your Carolina Hurricanes. I'm your host, Zach Martin. I'm the credentialed Carolina Hurricanes beat writer over at the Hawkeyes, also the co-host of the Surgecast, which is a weekly Carolina Hurricanes podcast, along with all my duties here at Locked On Hurricanes. On the Tuesday edition of the podcast, we're going to look at three possible options internally for the Hurricanes to go second line center. Two of them I'm very interested to see what people think of, and the third one I know a lot of people have mixed feelings about this guy, but we'll definitely see how that works out. We're going to be talking about Logan Stankoven, Seth Jarvis, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi as three guys who might take some potential time or guys who make sense as of right now with this roster to be the second line center for the Hurricanes. So starting off with Logan Stankoven, I mentioned it on one of my most recent articles at the Hockey Writers of looking at a projected roster 1.0, and I did list Logan Stankoven as a possible center. Now, I know some people have question marks about, well, he's 5'8". How is he going to be at center? You know, how's that really going to work out? And the thing is, Logan Stankoven has seen some time at center going all the way back to his junior days. A big shout out to Kane Statburn for actually looking these up. So, in the WHL with Kamloops, he was a 57.9% or 44.76 in terms of that back in 2021. In 2022, 55.8%, 561 out of 1,005 faceoffs, and then in 2023, he was a 58.3% or 465 out of 797 faceoffs. Now, in his career, he is a 46.7% in terms of the faceoffs, winning 98 out of a possible 210 attempts. That being said, going back to last year with the Dallas Stars, he did see some time at center. He had 85 faceoffs, lost 98, but it was also 46.4%. And even going back to 23-24, he did have 11 wins, 6 losses for 64.7%. So he has gotten a good bit amount of faceoff time in the NHL. Yes, it was a 45.1, it was 46.4%. Or 45.1 out of 87 for 106, but it was with Dallas 85 out of 85 wins, 98 losses for 46.4. So yeah, he had a good bit of faceoffs over there in Dallas. Of course, he had 2 faceoffs, lost 8 for the Hurricanes, but that's only 10 faceoffs. I mean, it's not a lot. And you're also talking about a Carolina Hurricanes team that has Jordan Staal and also Rod Brind'Amour, who's known as the faceoff king, and he has won back-to-back Selkies. Now with Stankoven and Jarvis, they're both right-handed shots, which would fill in the need that the Hurricanes have been looking for when it comes to having guys who are right shot centers. Now, does it make sense to move one of your wingers off and throw him in the center spot? Yes and no. I mean, if you really look at it, you just got Nikolai Ehlers in terms of you brought him in, and now you have as of right now, a plethora of wingers in your, on your roster as of right now. And let's, if you're the Carolina Hurricanes, well, instead of having a possibly Logan Stankoven or whoever on the third line with the Jordans, you could put him as a second line center in between probably Hall and Andrei Svechnikov, which would leave, Nikolai Ehlers with Sebastian Aho, Seth Jarvis as your top line. Then it's Hall, Stank, and Svetch, which is still a pretty good top 6 overall. And that's a really good second line, all things considered, because then if you start, Stankoven pretty much early on, in training camp and getting ready over the summer to be the second line center, that's not bad at all. Because then at that point, you move up Jackson Blake to be on the third line with the Jordans. And from what we've seen, if you put a young guy with the Jordans, they do pretty well with the Carolina Hurricanes. We saw with Seth Jarvis in his second and third years in the league. He played a lot of time with Jordan Staal and Jordan Marnock, and even throughout this past season, he saw some time on the third line because Rod Brind'Amour knows if you put him down there, that line's going to go. And you've seen it so far with Stankoven. Stankoven played really well at the back half of last season, and even too, he played really good in the playoffs with the Jordans. So if you think that, hey, we know Logan Stankoven can play really well, why don't we throw him up onto the second line center spot and then move Jackson Blake to the third? There's a third young guy that learns from the Jordans. And I think that's, something that we've seen, that there is some merit to putting a young guy with, Martinook and Staal. So, and then that, like I said, then that way it opens up you move a winger over to the center, then you can still have, like I said, Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis is your top line. Then it's Hall, Stankoven, and Svechnikov. And Stankoven is a right shot center. So now you're filling your second line center spot, and it's a right-handed shot center that you can really rely on. And Stankoven has had some NHL experience in his very young career as a center. Because like I said, last year with the Stars, 85 wins. Yes, it was 98 losses, but 46.4%. It still isn't bad, all things considered. When you look at a lot of other centers around the league are kind of around that range. But if you go back to his times in the Western Hockey League, yes, I know it's juniors, but still 57.9, 44 out of 76, 55.8, 561 out of 1,005, 58.3, 465 out of 797. And like I said, his overall career, 46.7, 98 out of 210. Those are still really solid numbers to look at. Like I said, I know it's junior hockey, but still, he's played some center. It's not like he's just been a pure winger, then you're sliding him over to the center spot. No, he's had time there. And like I said, even the Stars used him, part of last year, going back to, last season, he had a lot of time at center for the most part for the Stars, and he even had a little bit of it in his rookie year when he played 20 games in the regular season. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that you could possibly look at Logan Stankoven as someone that could be an option for second line center. Like even, DJ and, Pete Blackburn from, Chaos Podcast over at All City, they even mentioned that, hey, Stankoven's done it before. He's a right shot. Why not maybe look at him at second line center? So I'm not the only one that's thought of this, where you could probably put Stank in that position and then you might be going somewhere with it. Yeah, is he 5'8"? Would that be a concern maybe? I mean, only time will tell, but I'm not thinking, he plays really well. Like I say, he's won some faceoffs. He's 46% for his career. That's still pretty good, all things considered, for a guy who's only had 210 opportunities to be almost at 47%. And like I said, and that's not even putting him with Jordan Staal and, Rod Brind'Amour as two guys who can teach him more faceoffs. Like I think that would be a good option if the Hurricanes feel like internally they can turn to Stankoven. That would be a good situation overall to go with him there. So I wouldn't say no to a possible Stankoven second line center spot behind Sebastian Aho, because it would be Aho, Stankoven, Jordan Staal, and Jesperi Kotkaniemi. Then maybe you swap him in and out with Mark Jankowski, or maybe you throw Kotkaniemi over to the left wing because he's done it before. Then maybe you still have Mark Jankowski as your fourth line center. So there are some options there too. If they think like, well, we still want KK in the lineup, let's throw him over to the left wing. You still have Jankowski in as your 4C, then you can go from there in case, Jankowski gets thrown out during a face-off. You slide Jesperi Kotkaniemi over, take the face-off for a quick, and then there you go. Like there's still some options there as well. So I wouldn't say no to Logan Stankoven. I think, is it a possible gamble? Well, yeah, but I mean, he's done it before, so it's like you're just throwing him out to the wolves and seeing how he does. So that is one possible option to look at Stankoven. Another option, Well, I think it's Seth Jarvis, and he's shown over recently that he can win some faceoffs for the Hurricanes. So stick around, and we'll talk about Seth Jarvis here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action, so why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. It's easy to use, there's a lot of fast ways to pay out, and it makes even regular season games feel like must-watch events. And whether you're placing a same-game parlay or watching a bet right into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like you are part of the action from start to finish. New to FanDuel? Well, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back to segment 2 of Locked On Hurricanes, your team every day. Now, we talk about Logan Stankoven as a possible option, but what about Seth Jarvis? Obviously, another right shot, guy. Definitely can fill that need of that second line center in the right shot spot as well. And I will say this, Corey Lavalette of The Athletic has put it out there of why not Seth Jarvis? And I kind of agree with him too, for the fact that you look at Rod Brind'Amour really trusts Seth Jarvis. He's got him on all phases of the ice, offense, neutral, defensive zone. They put him on the PK, put him on the power play. He's basically the Swiss Army knife for Rod Brind'Amour and the coaching staff. And recently, throughout his career so far, he has taken some faceoffs for the Hurricanes. I will say this, though. In his career, he is 220 faceoffs won compared to 326 lost, which is a 41.3%. This past season, he was 52 wins, 100 losses for 34.2%. Wasn't the greatest faceoff year for him, but, it is what it is. Of course, dealing with a shoulder, who really knows? Back in 23-24, he was 157 wins, 195 losses for 44.6%. The year before, 34.69 wins, 17 losses. And then his rookie season, 11 wins, 14 losses for 44%. So it's kind of a weird, 44, 34, 44, 34 kind of bouncing back and forth. So 41.3% is his career numbers in terms of the faceoffs. Now, that being said, with his shoulder, I don't see him really kind of being a second line center option for the Carolina Hurricanes, especially when you have to use your shoulders a lot. I don't know if the Hurricanes want to do that, especially with him trying to get ready for the Olympics. It'll be very interesting to see how that works out. Like I said, it's a possibility that they could look at Seth Jarvis there in that spot. I just don't feel that one's probably the best way to go, especially if they're trying to make sure he doesn't, mess up his shoulder even more. And I think for the fact that he has really good chemistry with Sebastian Aho. So I would say if you want to keep that chemistry going, keep him on the first line, right wing, and just pair him with Aho and Ehlers and go from there. But let's say they, feel like it's best to go with Ehlers, Aho, Svechnikov first line, then you're looking at a Hall, Jarvis, Jackson Blake second line, and then you still have Stankoven on the third with the Jordans. That's a possibility of a way to go there if they feel like that's kind of the best move, because you're still having, you got that speed demon in Ehlers, you got that playmaker in, Aho, then you got the, power forward in Svechnikov, bringing that up, and then you got, of course, Seth Jarvis being the Swiss Army knife that he is as your center, with Taylor Hall being the playmaker and Jackson Blake being a guy going into his second year who's looking to build off of a 17-goal, 34-point season. So that most likely could be your top six right there. I just don't see the Hurricanes putting Stankoven on the same line as Seth Jarvis, because you're talking two guys who are 5'10" and 5'8" on the same line. I think the Hurricanes are going to look at trying to keep that separated as much as possible. So that's why I feel like Blake would probably be on the second line if they go with Jarvis as the 2 seed and they throw Svechnikov at the first. That I know a lot of people want to see Stankoven in the top 6 if that's the case, but I just don't see them having two guys at 5'10" or less on the same line, and nothing against those guys, but I just don't see them doing it. I think they definitely want to be able to spread that out and spread out the scoring a little bit. So that's why I feel like if that's the case, it's going to be a stink on the third with the Jordans, with Jackson Blake as the second line right winger. But like I said, who really knows? I think that, like I said, that is an option. I know Corey Levitt in The Athletic brought it up. So that's why I feel like that could be another option if you go internally for the Hurricanes as a 2C. I know we're going to talk about Jesperi Kotkaniemi in the third segment. I mean, you could look – I don't really know who else you could go internally as your 2C outside of, if it's not Jesperi, it's Stankoven or Jarvis. I just don't see the Hurricanes moving Jordan Stahl to the second line center. I don't see them putting Mark Jankowski as the 2C. Tyson Jost as the 2C doesn't make sense. And unfortunately, Eric Robinson just doesn't play center. So you're kind of limited in terms of just the internal guys that you want to go with as your possible 2C going into next season. And I mean, and currently there's no guys in the AHL system that's ready for that. So I think that's kind of where you're in that weird area of, if you stick internally with this roster, and if you feel like, KK isn't that guy at 2C, and you're going to go internally. That's why I feel like, and that's why it's been brought up by a bunch of different people, that you could look at one of the wingers and throw them as a possible 2C for the Hurricanes. Like I said, I know DJ and Pete from What Chaos maybe mentioned Logan Stankoven. I know I put Logan Stankoven as a 2C possibly. I'll make sure to link that article down in the description on YouTube and on the audio wherever you get to your podcast. I will, like I said, put the link to that article there explaining why I think Stankoven, in written format would be the 2C, and you kind of see what the lineup would look like if that's if that's the way they go with it. But I feel like those are the two guys. If you're going from winger positions, I think those two guys make sense. And that's why with Jarvis, I feel like he might be a lesser of the two options, and not because of skill, it's just because of his shoulder. Like I said, if he's not going to get a surgery on his shoulder that he re-aggravated this past season, missing 7 games after playing hurt with a hurt shoulder for over 60 games, the season before and even through the playoffs, and he wants to be ready for the Olympics just in case he gets the call for Team Canada. That's why I don't feel like the Hurricanes are going to go to Jarvis as a 2C, but his name has been mentioned. He has done a lot of faceoffs for Rod Brind'Amour in the past, so that could be a possibility of him being there. So that's why he's being kind of mentioned right now. But in terms of, if you're looking at Stankoven and Jarvis, I think Jarvis might be the guy just for preservation of his body and preservation of his shoulder. As of right now, I just don't see the Hurricanes putting him as a 2C for the most part, but I could be wrong. If they feel like he's the best guy to do it, then why not? And then you have Blake as your second line right wing, and then you have Stankoven on your third line still. Or if we go back to the first point of, if it's Stankoven, you got Ehlers, Aho, Jarvis, Hall, Stank, and Svetch. Either way, you're still looking pretty good for your top 6, and you are addressing the right shot center that the Hurricanes are looking for. And they have two guys who have played center, in different aspects of their career, going back to juniors and all that. And also, they also have some AHL time as well. So you're not just throwing purely wingers into the center position. Both of these guys have had time in different aspects of their careers, depending on what level they're at, as a center at some point. So it's not out of the realm of possibility. It's just which one do you want to go with if it's one of those two guys. That being said, I said there's a third option, and I know in the description you probably saw who could be replacing Jesperi Kotkaniemi as the 2C. Well, here's the devil's advocate part of the third option, and surprise, it's a trick question. The third option for 2C is probably Jesperi Kotkaniemi once again, and I know a lot of people have some thoughts about that, but if we know Rod Brind'Amour and the staff and the front office and the organization overall, it could be Jesperi Kotkaniemi to start the year, and they go from there and see what happens. So stick around, and I'll tell you why I think that might be the case for the Hurricanes in 25-26 here in a second on a Tuesday edition of Locked on Hurricanes. Welcome back to segment 3 of Locked on Hurricanes, your team every day. And welcome to the Devil's Advocate part of the section of the podcast, where I think a lot of people are probably yelling at their computers, phones, tablets, phone, listen to the audio portion of this. They're like, no, why are you bringing up Jesperi Kotkaniemi as an option? Well, the thing with Jesperi Kotkaniemi is if you're looking at a guy who you need for faceoffs, he does have some good numbers. I'll give him some credit on that one. Now with Montreal, he was a 45.7, 42.8, and 47.9% of the faceoff dot. However, with the Carolina Hurricanes, 51.2, 51.4, 51.5, and 51.8. So he has definitely have gotten better, 0.2, 0.1, 0.3, over the last 4 seasons of the Carolina Hurricanes. Now, over his AHL career, he's a 49.3. With him, his 3 years in Montreal has averaged out to 45.9. But with the Carolina Hurricanes, he is a 51.5. Yes, I know goals and points and all that have not really been great. Jesperi Kotkaniemi in his time with the Carolina Hurricanes, obviously 54 goals, 132 points in 305 games, with him having 43 points in 22-23, followed up by a disappointing 27 points and 12 goals in this past year, 12 goals again with 33 points. So did see that uptick in his assists again, but still fell, 10 points short of his best season with the Hurricanes. But like I said, he's got the face-off numbers for the Carolina Hurricanes, because it's not just Sebastian Aho and Jordan Staal doing it. They do have Logan, they do have Jesperi Kotkaniemi, who's got that 51%, so they could look at him and be like, well, he's done it before. We know what he can do, and it's just one of those things where if we don't feel like that we want to go with a winger as a 2C, Jesperi Kotkaniemi, we've tried to play him there. He could be that guy, because unfortunately right now you do have Mark Jankowski, who for his career is a 49.8% on the faceoff dot. That's going back to 3 years in Nashville, 52.9, 1 year in Pittsburgh at 46.7, 48% in Buffalo, 49.3% with the Calgary Flames in 4 years, and in Carolina, 50.5. He was a 50.5 this past season for the Hurricanes, and then 50.7 with Nashville. And a lot of 50s, higher 40s in terms of his time with Calgary, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, and all that stuff. The thing is, Mark Jankowski isn't a second-line center. He's definitely your 4C as of right now, if that's the path you want to go down. Now, if you move KK off of 2C for Stankoven or Jarvis, then you could put KK as your 4C, and then maybe Mark Jankowski as your extra center. Or if they feel like, hey, we're going to probably put Carrier or Robinson, probably Carrier as the healthy scratch, move KK to the left wing, and you still got Mark Jankowski, that might be the way they go too. But unfortunately, Janko, it just isn't a 2C. That's why you're looking at the 2 wingers of Stankoven and Jarvis. But however, like I said, devil's advocate here, the Hurricanes could just run it back with KK again and give him another shot at 2C. And if not, he's going to have 4 years left of his contract and a handful of games left in the 25-26 season. And by that point, I think we're going to have like 19 games left. So if they feel like, okay, we've given you another shot, it's not really working out. We got 4 years left after these, few games that are left in the regular season, maybe he's possible trade piece at the deadline. And who gave KK another shot, didn't work out. Maybe a team want a full 5 years, but maybe they'll take on his $4.82 million for the next 4 and a handful of games left, plus if he makes it to the playoffs. That could be the way the Hurricanes could go. They could just try to run it back with him again and then possibly trade him. That's what I think might happen. I don't think the Hurricanes would do it, but I think that might be a possibility of if they go with Jesperi again, and if it just doesn't work out, maybe he's just a trade piece come the deadline and they move on from there and figure something else. I guess it really just depends on what they think is, how that's kind of the way it goes. So that's why I feel like if the Hurricanes don't go with Stankoven, if they don't go with Jarvis, and we're just talking internally, we're talking internal options. For Wednesday's show, we will be doing a lot of external options, who the Hurricanes could look at as external pieces. So make sure to tune in for the Wednesday show of the podcast. But in terms of right now, just internally, I don't really think that they're going to move up. I don't think they're going to move Jankowski up. I don't think they're going to move Tyson Jost up as a 2 seed. Those guys are great. They're just not 2 seed guys. And you have to look at possibly Stankoven or Jarvis as, a guy that, guys have played on the wing before who have played on the wing, who have also played center as well. Maybe that's the way they go. Hey, we're going to stick internal, but let's move one of these wingers over to the 2C spot and see how that works out. Because like I said, they have Jordan Staal, they have Rod Brind'Amour, they have guys who can help teach those two how to do faceoffs a little bit better to take their upper 40% range and take them maybe like 49, 50, 51%. At least that way you're over the 50% mark. But however, if they feel like, hey, we're just going to give KK one more shot, see how it goes, and maybe if it just doesn't pan out, maybe it's a January trade, maybe it's a trade deadline trade. Some team will take his 4.8 for the next 4 years and just be done with it. And you've tried it for almost 5 seasons and it still hasn't worked out. Maybe you just move on from there and figure out what you can get, and maybe you address your 2C option at the deadline, or you deal with your option next offseason and go from there. I know a lot of fans don't want to wait for another full season to figure out their 2C spot. Maybe it works out to where KK is a trade piece with a prospect and a sweetener and go get a second line center somewhere else. That's a possibility. I mean, I don't know any teams right now they're looking to give up their 2C, but maybe a team that's selling by the deadline, maybe they are willing to give up a 2C and will take on, they're going to get a center back in KK. Maybe there's a prospect, maybe a B or a low A rating prospect and some draft picks. And go from there, and if you get your 2C option at the deadline, or like I said, you wait until next offseason and you kind of just figure it out again from there. But that's what I'm thinking. If they just don't go with any wingers, if they don't go external, they stay in-house, KK might be their guy again. And I know a lot of people wouldn't be happy about that, or I know there's going to be a lot of mixed feelings on it. That's because I know a lot of people love KK. I like KK myself. It's just I think he's in a bad spot overall because he's a guy that should be a third-line center, but the fact that you have Jordan Staal still with the Canes, and they don't want to put him as the 4C option, because according to Rod, he doesn't number his lines, but they won't put KK as the 3C. So if that's the case, then his only real spot's 2C because it's just one of those things. And I don't know if they feel comfortable putting him at 4C for the whole season again. So maybe this is just hey, we're going to run it back one more time with him at 2C and hopefully it figures out. And if not, maybe it's time to part ways. I don't know. I mean, if they had him at 3C, I think we're having a totally different conversation where it's KK isn't being talked as a trade piece, or so I know some people mentioned buyouts and stuff like that. Even Elliot Friedman last year thought, would KK be a guy that could be for a buyout? Who knows? But definitely some options internally for the Hurricanes. Like I said, they got Stankoven, they got possibly Jarvis as right shot guys that have played center before in the past, juniors and even in the NHL. Or they can run it back one more time and just go with Jesperi Kotkaniemi. So only time will tell. But make sure to stick around for the Wednesday episode because we will definitely be looking at 3 possible options for external guys they can bring in as the 2C option. But that will do it for a Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Thank you for making your voice. Why don't you go check out Locked On NHL podcast, where there is no off season, and we're bringing you the daily league-wide stories that matter the most with the local coverage you love from Locked On. Find Locked On NHL on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you want to keep up with me, I'm One True Zach on X. The podcast is LO_Hurricanes. I'm also on Blue Sky, the Zachary Martin, where if you click the link trees in my bios, you can find all of my written content at thehockeywriters.com. If you want to check out my other podcast, well, it's the Searchcast on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. For Locked On Hurricanes, we are on Spotify, Google, Apple, iHeartRadio, wherever you listen to your podcast. Make sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a 5-star rating or review because I might just read it on the show. For YouTube, it's Locked On Hurricanes. You can subscribe, hit the bell notifications so you don't miss the show. Hit the thumbs up to let me know if you like the show as well. Share with other Caniacs who become everydayers just like you. But I hope everyone enjoyed the Tuesday edition of Locked On Hurricanes. Enjoy your Tuesday, and until next time, as always, let's go, Canes.